not an everyday occurrence, but it happened every day. For it to happen enough, we never thought it would happen. My niece left me. I never thought we would be the ones that left. Remember, domestic violence is real, y'all. If you see any signs, report it. Tell somebody. I might not know everybody in this building, but I love everybody in this building. I promise I'm a changed man. I'm a humble man.
At 17 years old, she made a choice that would cost her everything. She walked away from her college dreams, her bright future, and her family's warnings to financially support a 30-year-old felon with 6 children. 10 years later, when she finally tried to take her life back, he made sure she'd never get the chance. Welcome back to Shadows of Crime, where we expose the darkest truths hiding behind closed doors. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because today's case will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love and loyalty. May 9th, 2024, a kitchen in North Lawndale, Chicago. 27-year-old Tetorsha Williams takes a deep breath and speaks the words she's been rehearsing for weeks. Words that should have set her free. Words that should have given her son Christian the life he deserved. Kevin, I'm leaving. We're done. For 10 years, Tetorsha had been the backbone of this relationship. She'd left her promising college career at Malcolm X College to support Kevin Scott, a man 12 years older than her. She'd helped raise his 6 children from previous relationships. She'd paid the bills, kept the household running, and endured his infidelity and manipulation. But now, at 27, she was finally ready to reclaim her life. Kevin Scott stood there, processing what he'd just heard. The woman who had sacrificed everything for him was walking away. The woman who had been his financial lifeline was cutting the cord. The mother of his 7th child was taking that child with her. What happened next would destroy a family forever and leave a 5-year-old boy asking a question no child should ever have to ask. Why, Mommy? Before we continue with this devastating case, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone stay in a relationship that everyone else could see was toxic? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and smash that like button if you think this story needs to be heard. Because what Tetorsha didn't know was that Kevin Scott would rather see her dead than see her free. Tetorsha Williams wasn't supposed to end up as another statistic. Born to Trinetta McClure and Terrell Williams in Chicago, she grew up surrounded by love, faith, and endless possibilities. Her family knew her as Toria or Bobo, a bright, ambitious young woman who seemed destined for greatness. At St. Malachy Church, where she dedicated her life to Christ from a young age, Tetorsha was known for her generous heart and unwavering faith. She was the kind of person who opened her home to anyone in need, always putting others before herself. Her warmth drew people in, and her determination inspired everyone around her. Academically, Tetorsha excelled beyond expectations. She graduated high school as a high achiever, earning her place at Malcolm X College, where she was building the foundation for a successful future. Her professors saw potential, her family saw promise. Her friends saw a young woman who would change the world. Tetorsha had dreams that extended far beyond her North Lawndale neighborhood. She envisioned a career that would make her family proud, a life filled with purpose and achievement. At 17, she was focused, driven, and ready to conquer whatever challenges lay ahead. But here's what nobody could have predicted. All of that promise, all of that potential, all of those carefully laid plans were about to be derailed by a single decision. A decision that would transform this college-bound teenager into someone completely different. Because at 17, when most young women are worried about exams and career choices, Tetorsha Williams was about to meet a 30-year-old man who would convince her to abandon everything she'd worked for. And that meeting would set in motion a decade of manipulation that would ultimately cost her everything. At 17, Tetorsha Williams was navigating the typical challenges of college life when she encountered Kevin Scott, a man who would completely alter the trajectory of her existence. Scott was 30 years old, 13 years her senior, with a complex personal history that should have sent any rational person running in the opposite direction. Kevin Scott wasn't just older, he came with serious baggage. He already had 6 children with different women, a pattern that spoke volumes about his inability to maintain stable relationships. His reputation in the community was far from stellar, marked by instability and a talent for manipulation that he'd perfected over the years, but Scott possessed something that drew Tetorsha in: charisma. He knew exactly how to present himself, especially on social media, where he crafted an image that masked his true nature. His humor and charm became the bait that hooked a naive teenager who couldn't yet recognize the difference between genuine affection and calculated manipulation. The red flags were everywhere, glaring and impossible to miss if you knew what to look for. A 30-year-old man pursuing a 17-year-old college student. 6 children with multiple women, suggesting a pattern of abandonment and irresponsibility. Stories from his past that painted a picture of emotional abuse and control. Family and friends who tried desperately to warn Tetorsha about what she was getting herself into. But Scott was a master manipulator. He convinced this promising young woman that she was different, that she was special, that she could be the one to change him. He painted himself as someone who needed her help, someone who would be lost without her support and guidance. The most devastating decision came when Tetorsha chose to leave Malcolm X College. She abandoned her education, her dreams, and her carefully planned future to help Kevin Scott raise his 6 children and manage his household expenses. At 19, she became his wife, officially tying herself to a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a resource to be exploited. By the time she realized the magnitude of her mistake, she was trapped in a web of financial dependence and emotional manipulation that would take her nearly a decade to escape. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever seen someone ignore obvious red flags in a relationship? What do you think are the biggest warning signs when it comes to age gap relationships? Hit that like button and let me know your thoughts, because recognizing these patterns could save someone's life. The question that haunts everyone who knew Tetorsha is simple. How did a brilliant, faith-driven college student become the 7th woman to have Kevin Scott's child? By 19, Tetorsha Williams had become Mrs. Kevin Scott, officially bound to a man who viewed marriage not as partnership, but as ownership. What followed was a decade-long nightmare disguised as domestic life, where every day brought new challenges and deeper entrapment. The birth of their son Christian should have been a moment of pure joy. Instead, it became another chain binding Tetorsha to Kevin Scott. She was now the mother of his 7th child, joining the ranks of 6 other women who had learned the hard way what it meant to be involved with this man. Christian became both her greatest blessing and her most complicated burden. She loved him fiercely, but his existence made leaving exponentially more difficult. Kevin's manipulation tactics were textbook predator behavior. He used emotional coercion to maintain control, making Tetorsha feel responsible for his well-being and that of his other children. When she questioned his behavior or expressed dissatisfaction, he would twist the situation to make her feel guilty for being ungrateful. He convinced her that without her financial support, his children would suffer. And what kind of person would abandon innocent kids? The infidelity was constant and humiliating. Kevin Scott had no intention of being faithful to Tetorsha, despite her unwavering loyalty and financial sacrifice. He flaunted his relationships with other women, knowing that Tetorsha was too invested to leave. Each betrayal chipped away at her self-worth, making her question whether she deserved better treatment. For years, Tetorsha endured this cycle of abuse, manipulation, and disrespect. She worked to pay the bills while Kevin contributed little beyond chaos and heartbreak. She raised his children while he pursued other women. She sacrificed her dreams, while he lived without consequences for his actions. But something began to shift as Tetorsha approached her late 20s. The naive 17-year-old who had fallen for Kevin's charm was gone, replaced by a woman who had seen enough, endured enough, and sacrificed enough. She started to remember who she used to be before Kevin Scott entered her life. She began to envision a different future for herself and Christian. Her family, especially her mother, Trinetta McClure, had never stopped worrying about Tetorsha's safety. Trinetta had watched her daughter disappear into this toxic relationship and had long feared that Kevin's behavior would escalate beyond emotional abuse. The warnings from family became more urgent as they witnessed the toll this relationship was taking on Tetorsha. By 2024, Tetorsha had made a decision that would change everything. She was no longer willing to accept Kevin's treatment. She was no longer willing to sacrifice her son's future for Kevin's comfort. She was ready to break free from the prison she had unknowingly built around herself. Tetorsha and her mother had found a 3-flat apartment in Chicago, a fresh start where she and Christian could build the life they deserved. The excitement was building. The plans were in motion. Freedom was within reach, but Kevin Scott was about to discover that his meal ticket was walking away, and his reaction to losing control would be more violent and final than anyone could have imagined. The 3-flat apartment represented everything Tetorsha Williams had been dreaming of for years. Located away from the chaos and toxicity that had defined her adult life, this wasn't just a new address. It was her declaration of independence. For the first time in a decade, Tetorsha could see a clear path to the future she and 5-year-old Christian deserved. Her mother, Trinetta McClure, shared in this excitement like never before. After years of watching her daughter trapped in Kevin Scott's web of manipulation, Trinetta finally saw hope returning to Tetorsha's eyes. They spent hours planning the move, discussing how they would decorate Christian's new room and imagining the peaceful life that awaited them. Tetorsha was practically glowing with anticipation. She was so excited, Trinetta would later recall, her voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. This wasn't just enthusiasm about a new home. This was a woman reclaiming her life after 10 years of giving everything to someone who had given her nothing but pain in return. The apartment represented safety for Christian, who would finally have stability without the constant tension that had marked his early years. Tetorsha envisioned bedtime stories without arguments in the background, family dinners without Kevin's unpredictable moods, and a childhood where her son could simply be a child. But before any of this could happen, Tetorsha had to do the one thing that terrified her most: tell Kevin Scott that their relationship was over. May 9, 2024 started like any other day, but it would end in unimaginable tragedy. Tetorsha had rehearsed this conversation countless times in her mind. She knew Kevin wouldn't take the news well. His entire lifestyle depended on her financial support and emotional labor. But she also believed that after 10 years together, after everything she had sacrificed for him, he would at least respect her decision to leave. She was wrong. When Tetorsha finally found the courage to tell Kevin that she was moving out and taking Christian with her, she expected anger. She expected manipulation. She expected him to try every trick in his playbook to make her stay. What she didn't expect was the level of rage that would consume him when he realized he was losing control permanently. The kitchen of their North Lawndale home became the setting for a confrontation that would destroy multiple lives in a matter of minutes. Tetorsha stood her ground, probably feeling empowered for the first time in years. She was finally choosing herself and her son over Kevin's demands. But Kevin Scott had already made his own choice. If he couldn't control Tetorsha Williams, then nobody would have her. And 5-year-old Christian was about to witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. What happened next in that North Lawndale kitchen on May 9, 2024, would shatter every life it touched. Kevin Scott's response to losing control was swift, brutal, and unforgivable. He pulled out a gun and shot Tetorsha Williams multiple times, ending the life of the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. But the most heartbreaking detail of this already devastating crime was that 5-year-old Christian witnessed his mother's murder. The little boy who should have been playing with toys or watching cartoons instead saw his father destroy his world in the most violent way possible. The trauma inflicted on this innocent child is beyond comprehension, a wound that will never fully heal. Tetorsha was pronounced dead at the scene when police arrived for a well-being check. The woman who had been planning her new life just hours earlier was gone. Her dreams of freedom and safety for Christian destroyed in an instant. Kevin Scott didn't stay to face the consequences of his actions. Like the coward he had always been, he fled the scene immediately after the shooting, beginning a desperate attempt to evade justice. He knew exactly what he had done, and he knew the law would be coming for him. During his time as a fugitive, Scott went to extraordinary lengths to change his appearance, even attempting to remove a distinctive face tattoo that would make him easily recognizable. For nearly 3 months, he managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement while Tetorsha's family struggled with grief and the overwhelming burden of planning a funeral they couldn't afford. The community rallied around Tetorsha's devastated family, but no amount of support could fill the void left by her absence. A GoFundMe was established to help cover funeral expenses, raising nearly $2,000 from people who had been touched by Tetorsha's story or simply wanted to help a grieving family seek justice. Trinetta McClure found herself not only mourning the loss of her daughter, but also trying to help young Christian process an incomprehensible tragedy. "He understands that Mommy is in heaven," she explained, "but he is like, 'Why, Mommy?' A question that no grandmother should have to answer and no child should have to ask." The ripple effects of Kevin Scott's violence extended far beyond his immediate victims. Friends, neighbors, and church members who had known Tetorsha as a generous, loving woman struggled to understand how someone could destroy such a beautiful life. For 3 months, the question remained, would Kevin Scott face justice for his crimes, or would he escape accountability just as he had escaped responsibility throughout his entire adult life? After nearly 3 months of evading capture, Kevin Scott's run from justice finally came to an end. Law enforcement agencies had been relentlessly pursuing leads, and despite his attempts to alter his appearance and stay hidden, Scott was eventually apprehended and charged with first-degree murder. The arrest brought a sense of relief to Tetorsha's family, but it could never bring back the vibrant woman whose life had been so brutally cut short. The legal proceedings that followed would force the family to relive the nightmare repeatedly. Court appearances, testimonies, and evidence presentations meant that Tetorsha's loved ones couldn't simply grieve in peace. They had to fight for justice while processing their devastating loss. The first-degree murder charges reflected the premeditated nature of Scott's actions, acknowledging that this wasn't a crime of passion but a calculated act of violence by a man who refused to accept that he had lost control. Local organizations focused on domestic violence prevention used Tetorsha's story to highlight the deadly reality of intimate partner violence. Her death became a rallying cry for better resources, earlier intervention, and community awareness about the warning signs that too often go unrecognized until it's too late. The support extended beyond financial contributions. Trinetta received help with childcare, meals, and emotional support from a network of people who understood that healing from such a profound loss would take years, not months. Church communities, neighborhood groups, and advocacy organizations all played roles in ensuring that Tetorsha's family didn't have to face their grief alone. But even with all this support, the fundamental truth remained unchanged. A promising young woman was gone, and a little boy would grow up without his mother because one man couldn't accept losing control. Tetorsha Williams' tragic story contains numerous warning signs that domestic violence experts recognize as predictors of escalating abuse. Understanding these red flags could help save lives by encouraging earlier intervention and escape planning before situations become deadly. The age gap and power imbalance when Tetorsha and Kevin first met represents a classic pattern. At 17, she was vulnerable and impressionable, while Kevin was an experienced adult who knew exactly how to manipulate her emotions. Predators often target younger partners because they're easier to control and less likely to recognize manipulative behavior as abnormal. Kevin's financial dependency on Tetorsha was another critical warning sign. Abusers frequently create situations where their victims become financially responsible for them, making it harder for victims to leave. By having Tetorsha support not only him, but also his children from other relationships, Kevin created multiple layers of guilt and obligation that trapped her in the relationship. The pattern of infidelity, combined with emotional manipulation, is textbook abusive behavior. Kevin's constant cheating wasn't just about other women. It was about maintaining psychological control over Tetorsha. Each betrayal reinforced his message that she wasn't worthy of respect, while simultaneously making her feel grateful for any attention he did give her. Perhaps most telling was Kevin's history with multiple women and children. 7 children with different mothers suggests a pattern of using pregnancy and parenthood as tools of control. This behavior indicates someone who views relationships as opportunities for exploitation rather than genuine partnership. The escalation from emotional abuse to murder often happens rapidly once victims assert their independence. Kevin's immediate resort to deadly violence when Tetorsha announced her plans to leave demonstrates how quickly psychological abuse can become physical when abusers feel their control slipping away. Warning signs that friends and family should watch for include isolation from support systems, financial control, constant monitoring of activities, extreme jealousy, threats of violence, and any history of violence against previous partners. When victims express fear of their partner's reaction to leaving, this should be taken as a serious indicator of potential lethality. Prevention requires community awareness and intervention. Friends and family members who notice these patterns should offer support without judgment, help with safety planning, and connect victims with professional resources. Local domestic violence organizations provide confidential counseling, safety planning, and emergency shelter services. Most importantly, we must recognize that leaving an abusive relationship is incredibly complex and dangerous. Victims need support, not criticism, as they navigate the difficult process of escaping abuse. If Tetorsha's story resonates with you, please share it to help others recognize these warning signs. Awareness saves lives, and your voice could help someone identify danger before it's too late. Together, we can break the cycle of domestic violence by speaking up, supporting survivors, and demanding accountability from those who choose violence over respect. Tetorsha Williams' story serves as a devastating reminder that love should never come at the cost of one's safety, dignity, or dreams. Her decade-long relationship with Kevin Scott illustrates how manipulation can masquerade as devotion, trapping victims in cycles of abuse that become increasingly difficult to escape. The most crucial lesson from Tetorsha's tragedy is learning to recognize manipulation disguised as love. When someone consistently takes more than they give, creates financial dependency, or uses emotional manipulation to maintain control, these aren't signs of a passionate relationship, they're warning signs of abuse. Genuine love empowers and supports. It doesn't diminish or control. Communities must do better at supporting domestic violence victims before situations escalate to tragedy. This means creating safe spaces for people to share their concerns without judgment, providing practical resources like emergency housing and financial assistance, and training community members to recognize warning signs. Churches, schools, workplaces, and neighborhood organizations all have roles to play in creating networks of support that can intervene before it's too late. We must also address the cultural narratives that normalize unhealthy relationship dynamics. When we romanticize jealousy, possessiveness, or the idea that love requires sacrifice of one's independence, we inadvertently enable abusive behavior. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, trust, and support for each other's individual growth and happiness. If you recognize yourself or someone you love in Tetorsha's story, please know that help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-9723 provides 24/7 confidential support, safety planning, and local resources. You deserve relationships that build you up, not tear you down. Tetorsha Williams was a daughter, mother, friend, and dreamer whose life had immeasurable value. She deserved to see her 30th birthday, to watch Christian grow up, and to experience the freedom she was finally brave enough to claim. While we cannot bring her back, we can ensure her story serves as a catalyst for change. Remember to subscribe for more stories that matter, and please share this video to help spread awareness about domestic violence. Your engagement helps these important stories reach people who need to hear them. Together, we can work toward a world where no one else suffers Tetorsha's fate.